Hi guys, it's Ivo here, and in today's video we're going to continue with our Catstagram server app. We're going to add audit info for those of you who don't know and don't understand what is exactly audit info. That's basically saving information for our models about when the data was created, or when the data was modified, or when the data was deleted. So let's go to Visual Studio and see how we can do that. Before we begin, I would like to mention that if you are new around here, make sure you subscribe to the channel and turn on the notifications bell on. So why do we need audit info? The main reason is because usually when we want to log data, and when we need to extract some of these data in the future, for example, to see why some data was not edited correctly, or why some data was modified, or if some of our clients asks why our picture, for example, or Instagram post was deleted, we need to check that from our administration account and see uh, why the data was modified and who modified it. The main reason, also another reason to add that functionality to your application, is because usually you need to sort your data. For example, in our cat's controller, when we go to see the mine action, which essentially returns every post of a cat we created, we need to sort that. And currently it's not sorted, so if the client tries to show all the current posts, all the current cats from this particular user, the cats will not be in descending order by the date of creation. So what we need to do here, we need to add an order by descending by some created on property on the model. But the thing is, we are not currently saving that kind of information. Also, when we want to show comments, for example, in our app, we need to sort them by date of creation, for example. That's the other reason. The first one was when we need to search for some data that was modified, and for some reason we don't know why it was modified. For example, let's assume that some of our clients contact our support and says something along these lines. Hey guys, for some reason my account was hacked and all the data was deleted, and now I cannot see all the cats in my profile. So what we need to do is we need to go to the administration account and restore these images. It's a good idea to never delete data, but mark it as deleted, because this way you will have history and you may respond to client's request. For example, I accidentally deleted one of my posts, can you restore it for me, or something like that. So it's a good idea to never delete data from the database. Just have is deleted property and um, mark the data as deleted, but never deleted from the actual database. And your client logic should just skip all deleted entities and never show them in the feed. So how to do that? The first and the most easy way is to add all the needed properties. For example, date time created on, like this, in all the entities. But we need to do that for comments, for users, for likes, for example, and it will become it will become very tricky to remember which entity has that field, which entity doesn't have it, and so on. So what's a better option is to just create a basic class called entity, mark it as abstract, and put the information here. So what we can do is we can just mark public date time created on like this, and we can also specify public date time modified on like this. We can also say public string created by. The string is the user ID. By default, the user IDs are just strings in the database, and public string modified by something like this. What we can also do is we can add, let's create a base folder. Let's move the entity there, models.base. And here's the reason why we're creating a catstagram app. This one is so cute and she always wants to stay in my lap when I'm working. Okay, so we have the entity, and let's create another one, which will be deletable entity. Deletable entity, which will have the information public date time deleted on like this, and public string deleted by like this. Since not all entities are actually deleted, so I'm going to mark that as no, and I'm going to add another property, public bool is deleted, which by default should be false. Okay, and in the entity, the modified on property should be knowable too, because when we create an entity, we want to always set the date time, but when we modify it, but the created entity may not be edited at all, so the modified on just should be knowable. Okay, from now on, what we can do is we can just specify that our cat is deletable entity. We should just need to wait for Sharper. So our cat is deletable entity like this, and what we also need to do is we need to specify that our deletable entity is actually an entity too. So whenever we want to mark an entity as deletable, we need to just inherit from the base class. That should be enough. Then what we need to do is we need to go to our catstagram DB context and mark that the entity cat has one user, which the entity cat has one created by. I'm not sure whether we need to mark that as a foreign key. Let me think for a minute. We may not need to mark it as a foreign key because usually we won't be making joins on this table, so we may just save the data, but for example, save the username which created the entity, but never link it to the actual user. Not sure whether it's needed to have a join, to have a actual database connection here. So I'm going to leave it without a relationship, and in the future, if we decide that it's needed, we are going to add it. But for now, let's leave it like that. Okay, good. So I've added the created by. We may mark it as required, but it's not actually that necessary. Let's put it. There is no right or wrong way to create the audit info. It should just serve our purpose. So if we save all this data, it will be great. Good. So the thing is that for the user, if we want to save the same data, because we already have an identity, have an inheritance, we cannot say that we want that to be deletable entity too, because we cannot have multiple inheritance in C#. So here we just need to copy the same fields if we want to have the same functionality for the user, and we want to do we want to have that information? We want to have the information when the user was created and when was modified, but we are not going to delete users. We are not going to allow that in our business logic. So let's skip, for example, the deleted on properties. It really depends on how we want to implement our business logic. Let's say that deleting users is forbidden. We may have a hidden property. For example, if a user doesn't want to have his profile shown, we may just say that we will hide it but not delete it. Let's say that the business requirement is something like that. Okay, so I copied this. We're going to need an interface entity, which will just have the same properties as the entity. Like this, and IDeletable entity too. We're going to use these interfaces in a minute. Deletable entity. Something like this. And we'll need to remove the publics here, because that will make the interface a default interface, which we don't need here. So this needs to be IDeletable entity, and also the IDeletable entity is actual an entity, something like that. Good. I just remembered that someone commented why I'm putting public here. It was just a mistake. If you don't have the latest C# version of, I believe it's version 8, you won't be able to add public modifiers in an interface. This is just a default interface. So what I'm going to mark here is just to remove that. That was an old mistake which I did in one of my previous videos. Okay, that was fixed. So what's next? What's next? We need to specify that when we save an entity, we need to check whether it's a new entity and add the date time for the created on property, and we need to add the user also. How to do that? We just need to overwrite save changes async. For example, let me see which method we're using. We're using save changes async everywhere. So I'm going to overwrite that. We also may need to overwrite this version, this version, and this version too. So we need to override all these methods and write our logic there. I'm going to reorder them. Let's make the synchronous version first. Then I'm going to add a private method, private void apply audit information, which will just get all the entries. Var entries, this dot change tracker, entries, of type entity, like this, and yeah. We need to get the entity object behind that. But first, what we need to do is we need to get the entries. So let's get the entries. Then var entities equals entries dot of type entity. Let me think for a minute how to mark that. Something like this. So we just search for every entry which has the state added in our context. Then we select the entity behind that entry, so the actual object which we're going to save into the database, and we get all of these entities which are of type entity. Then I'm just going to mark all these created entities. I'm going to say created entity created on equals datetime UTC now. I also need to mark created entity created by the username, but I'm going to do that in a minute because we need to have an interface for that. Then I'm going to add the same thing for modified entities equals entries dot where it's essentially the same but modified like this. I'm going to list that because otherwise I will have multiple enumerations error. And for all the modified entities, I would like to say modified entity dot modified on equals datetime UTC now. And I need to do the same thing. Let's make it more optimized. Let's do it like this. Select entry goes to, it will be more optimized because currently we're for eaching and using a loop for every type of entity. It's a better idea to have only a single loop here and then just check for the state. So I'm going to say entity entity equals entry dot entity, and then entry dot state like this. I'm going to mark to list, and for each entry I'm going to add some logic. So if entry entity is identity, I'm going to say if entry dot state equals added, set created onto datetime UTC now. Else, if entry state was entity state modified, say modified on equals datetime UTC now. Then else if entry dot entity is deletable entity, why this is always false? I have a cat which is deletable entity. Let me think for a minute. There's something wrong, I guess. Yeah, it's because if it's not an entity, it won't be deletable entity too, because that's inherits from this one. So let's move the if first like this. Let me see the switch statement generated. It's uglier in my opinion. Let's see this one. It's also not very pretty. So let me check it one more time. Change tracker. Entries where state is, that's not needed. Get all the entries. We can do it like this actually, where entry entity is identity, and remove that check. It won't work the way I thought it would work. Okay, so get the entry, select entity state to list, and for each entry, if it's deletable entity, set the deleted on. Else, if it's identity, set the added and set the modified. That should work. And in all the overrides of our save changes, we are going to say apply audit info and call the base method. Like this. This way, we are going to add this data for every entity which is created or modified or deleted. Good. What we need to do is we need to specify the user. And then we need to add a migration to our database. Good, but before we do that, I would like to show you where you can find the following project. The source code is available at my GitHub profile. It's Ivai Lukenov, written like this. If you want, you may follow me, but go to repositories, hit TV here. I have some badge here. Let me check that out. That's interesting. Interesting. Nice. Okay, so write down TV here, and here is all the source code I'm showing in my YouTube channel. So you can download it, play with it, clone it, you can do whatever you like. I would be very thankful if you give me a star. I'm going to use the moment to thank my sponsors. That's Endeavor, Tsuke, Softuni, Smart IT, Noble Hire, and 1-Bit Software. Thank you guys, you truly rock. Some words about Endeavor. They are constantly searching for new passionate developers, so make sure you check their website out if you are currently searching for a new opportunity. All the other sponsors, Tsuke, Softuni, Smart IT, Noble Hire, and 1-Bit Software. Thank you guys, you truly rock, and I am extremely happy that you support my channel. Good, so that's the repository where you can find the code. Now let's continue with adding the migration and adding the logic for our current user. So I'm going to open the package manager console. I'm going to write add migration audit information. Here it is. So we have the new columns here. There's a default value for created on. Let's change that. UTC, and let's put the year for January 1st, 2020. Because the first year is just strange. This default value is useful when we have a new when we have old data without the created on column, and we migrate the database, so all the old entities saved in the database, what value they should have on the created on property, and this is just January 1st. It's good enough. Okay, so the next thing is I'm going to add in the infrastructure folder, I'm going to add services, and I'm going to add iCurrent user service. iCurrent user service. This is a helper interface which will just give me the current user. String get user name. Let me just check something. I use the username with Pascal case. Yep, so let's name it like this. Naming is important, guys. These small details are very important. Your code should be consistent. If it's not consistent, it literally starts to be with less and less quality over time, and when even the small details are not correct and not consistent, you're you're becoming more dirty in your code. When you see somebody from your team writing bad code, you start thinking, so this guy is not writing quality code, why should I? And the whole project goes to hell over time. So it's very important to make sure all the tiny details are written in very high quality way. I'm going to add get user ID like this. Let's create that service. Current user service. I'm going to say that I need HTTP context accessor. This is essentially a service in ASP.NET Core which gives us access to the current HTTP context. This is another small detail. I see that a lot of developers don't pay attention to this, but it's also important to have a quality code, and that's leaving more than one blank line between methods, properties, and so on. The other mistake is leaving methods like this. It's just ugly, and it these small details start uh, a practice which is growing like a tumor. It becomes difficult and more difficult for people to follow best practices, because when they see a small detail not written in a high quality fashion, people start to overdo that bad quality, and it leads to even more code which is not written in a perfect way. So pay attention to this guys, it's really important. Okay, so how to get the current username? Just this HTTP context request. It's not in the request, it's in the user dot identity dot name. This is how we can get the current username. So let's just write it like this to be sure that if the user is not authenticated, the name it will be no and not a no reference exception. The other thing we can do is the extension method get user ID, which I use here and there. Let me find it. Here it is, get ID. So let's reuse that and let's write it like this: HTTP context accessor.http context.user.getID, like this. And what we need to do is we need to register that service in our application services. We can add it as scoped. We can add the service as scoped because for each request the user is the same. They don't change between requests, so a scoped service here will be better in terms of correctness. It doesn't matter actually, but it's let's be a little bit more correct in terms of the dependency injection container. What we can also do is just cache that user, private read-only, claims principal user, like this, and say this dot user equals dot http context user, like this, and remove that. This way the user property will be cached. It's a minor performance fix, very minor, but still it's better to do it like this. And I'm going to mark that as knowable too. Although I'm safe here, it's a good idea to always be at least one idea more safer against no reference exceptions. So the current user service is implemented. Let's refactor our code and see where I'm using this getID method. I'm using it in my cats controller and only in the cats controller. Cat service. I'm not using the current user because it's passed like this. So let's just add private read only iCurrent user service. Let's rename that to cats. Let's check the identity controller, user manager, identity. There is no need to specify that it's service. So let's make it user manager, identity, app settings, cats controller, cats. And let's add that too. I'm going to find the word service to see whether I need to rename another service. No, it should be fine. If we see it in the future, we're going to reuse it. So this current user get, I don't like the name because this is way better. There is no need to write the same there is no need to write the same name which is already in the interface. There is no need to have iCurrentUser dot get user ID. It's more than enough to have current user get ID. It's descriptive enough and the code is explaining what is done here. So I prefer to use a shorter method because current user already has the user in the class name. So it doesn't matter. It's duplication of words and unnecessary longer method here. With the username, it's another topic because the word username means something, because if we have, for example, first name, last name, full name of the user, then we need to have the username because that's another word. But for the get ID, I prefer to have it shorter. So let's reuse the service everywhere. It's better to be extracted because this way it's easier for testing. This is why I introduce iCurrentUser service interface in all my projects, because this is easier for testing purposes. This service is easily replaced. It's the base user property is also easy to replace, but the service is better and requires less code. Okay, so now that I have that info, what I need to do is I need to just say that I want to have private read-only iCurrentUser service here from the constructor. And let's use it. Deletable entity deleted by equals the username. Entity created by equals the username, and entity modified by equals the username. I believe that's everything. We just now need to run our app and test it to make sure that it's working correctly. But before we do that, I'm going to show you my mentorship program. It's available on Patreon, patreon.com/Ivailokenov. There's a link in the description. And in this mentorship program, I'm allowing people to have extra and exclusive video content, additional lessons, private group in which you can ask me anything about career advancement, coding, whatever you like in terms of software engineering. Additionally, um, I'm creating live workshops, different kind of posts, so people can vote for the next content, whether it will be on the exclusive Patreon content or the exclusive on the public YouTube channel. It doesn't matter. And so far I've created some extra lessons, for example, Azure pipelines, DevOps tutorials, domain-driven design, clean architecture guidebook. That's a 70 pages guidebook, practical guidebook in which you create an app following the domain-driven design principles, porting ASP.NET Core framework, and so on and so on. Model binding, C# to C# communication with RabbitMQ, SignalR, gRPC, and so on and so on. I try to put extra content every month. So if you want, take a look at this and join the mentorship program. I hope it will be helpful to you. Now let's test our app and see whether everything is working correctly, because we changed quite a lot of stuff and we changed our infrastructure layer, the database. So here is the first exception. Object reference not set to an instance of an object. because there is no user. So let's put that. I tried to save everything and I didn't save the user. Let's try it again. Good. Let's go to the DB context and let's try to change or edit an entity. We need to create a new cat. So to do that, first I need to create an user. So let's go to the identity and register a user. There's a wrong interface here. Let's fix that. On server.features.identity models, okay. This one too, and this one too. So there should be an error here. Let's fix that and done. Good. So let's go to Postman and try to register a new user. User name, my user, email, test user, my user, password, test 1, 2. Could not get a response. Why is that? My app is online. Yeah, it's not HTTPS here. Okay, let's try again. This shouldn't make anything. Or, oh, this should work too. So let's remove that. There's a small bug I just noticed. The user should be marked as identity2 because essentially the identity is important here because otherwise the save changes won't work. I just noticed that we need to put the Swagger to not be public, but let's leave it public for now so that the client will be easier for testing. Okay, so let's go to the Getstagram DB context. Let's go to Postman and hit that. There shouldn't be any username. This should be an identity. It's added, created on, created by. Good. And the other entry, okay. Good. And an error occurred. Cannot insert the value no into column created by. Column does not allow no's. Interesting. Let me check that. State is added. So I'm putting a created on, right? Oh, that's created by. Yeah, I didn't. Yeah, sure. The created by is username, which in entity we marked it as required. But when we are creating um, a user, we don't have a created user, we don't have an authenticated user, so that shouldn't be required. Okay, add migration, audit information created by not required. The other solution here would be to extract the registered user, but that's it's not correct. The request doesn't have a user, so we're creating an entity without a user. We don't have to add created by. If it's not created by a user specifically, it should be no. So let's restart that. Okay, let's hit it again. Created by column doesn't allow no's. Why? I added a migration which says no about true. Getstagram ASP.NET users. Created by is not knowable. That's interesting because there's a migration here. Is that a bug in Entity Framework core? Or I'm just missing something. Let's run update database and see whether the ASP.NET users still does not allow no's. So that's strange because we are altering the column string. Let's make it like this. Remove migration. We cannot. That's tricky. Not sure what to do now. Well, it's afterwards, it's a preview version. Let's update a preview version of the packages, so it's normal to have problems. Let's update everything and see whether the problem persists. I don't believe it's from our code because it's pretty straightforward. I'm just changing a migration, so it may be from Entity Framework. Good, let's try again. Remove migration. The migration has already been applied to the database. Well, it's not exactly applied. Because created by is not... let me see what was the Revert Migration Entity Framework core. Funny. Remove migration. Like this. Good. Okay, that worked. Let's revert another migration for the whole audit information. Let's update the database to remove all the created on all that columns. Let me check it. Yep, it should be fine. And let's add now the new audit information migration, which should have the fixed. Let's change created onto this value like we did, and created by is knowable. Okay, now let's update. Let's run the app, which should update our database. And hopefully that we fixed the problem. Refresh tables, ASP.NET users, design. It still doesn't allow no's. What's wrong here? We didn't add any on model creating. Oh, yeah. Okay. Funny. This is what happens when we copy paste code, guys. This is it. I copy paste this because I don't have any other choice, and I forgot that the user should not have a required property. So let's remove the last migration. That's a good example of how to revert migration. So you're still learning something, but the video is getting longer, but still it's a good exercise for migrations. Update database. Remove this nasty field and add new migration. Good, so created by is knowable, and created by in the users should be knowable too. Cool, okay. Now it should be working. Let's refresh, get the ASP.NET user design, and finally it's okay. Let me try it. Let me hit that. Status okay. Good. So my user should have the correct date here. It's interesting how all other dates are not 2000 and yeah, because I forgot to put that. Oh well. let's put it for everyone who is going to download the code and play with it, just to have it here. And let's say that it's UTC, but I'm not going to update the database, it doesn't matter. We can put the migrations entities and namespaces in their correct place, just to make sure that our solution is consistent enough. This one is auto-generated every time I create a new migration, so there is no point to do that. Good, so let's try to log in and create a cat, and if everything is working correctly, the cat should be added with the correct data, correct audit information. Okay, so features, cats controller, create. Let's go. First I need to log in with the same data to get this token. Then to create cat I need to provide image URL and description, so I'm going to cats and specify image URL, some URL and description, my cool cat. This won't work because it's unauthorized, so let's add an authentication header like this. Created. Let's go to the database. Let's hid cats. See that it's created on. That's not correct. Deleted on is set to something, but not created on. I have a bug. Let me first check the migration. I'm adding to the created on. Okay. And created on. Deleted on shouldn't be. Should be knowable. Okay, so let's check the context. There's some problem here. Created on is added. Let's see it. Let's debug that. Let me check the model. It's marked as deletable entity, which is also an entity, entity. Yeah, that's a problem here. The logic is not correct. If entry state equals deleted, then add that. And the if should not be else if. So if it's deletable entity and we are deleting the entity, mark it as deleted on. If it's not a deletable entity and it's added or modified, add that. Okay, let's try with another cat. And last but not least, what we need to do is we need to add a global query filter to entity framework when we fetch cats to not return deleted cats. So let's run that again with change data, go to the cats, and see that the new cat has created by my user, and deleted on and modified on are okay. I'm not going to test for deleted. Oh, another bug. Deletable entity is deleted should be set to true. So if an entity is deleted, let's try it. Let's delete an entity, delete the cat. And then put a global filter, and then we're done. This feature should be implemented. So let's try to delete the cat with 5. Just delete cat /5. Send 200. Okay, this shouldn't delete the cat. Oh, there is no logic for not deleting the cat. Yeah. So it sets this to deleted, but what also should do is it should say that entry state is actually modified. What? It's read only? Yeah, okay. Well, so entry state should be modified, should be changed to modified. Because we don't want to delete the actual objects. Let's first create another cat. Like this, 6. Then delete the 6th cat. Good. Let's go to the cats and see that the 6th cat is no longer hard deleted from the database, but instead it's marked as deleted. We can see that the modified on is also working. And it's marked as deleted by this user on this time. Good. I'm not sure whether we should change the let me think for a minute, because we won't be we don't want to have the modified entity. Actually, it's okay. When we delete an entity, we modified it too, so it should be okay. Otherwise, if we don't want to have the modified properties changed on deletion, we can just mark it as return like this. Or the other way is to just invert the two ifs. So if it's deleted, check whether it's deletable entity. Else if is added, check whether it's identity and replace this. But I actually don't mind. Let's leave it like this, just return the statement. Let's try it one more time. Then we're going to put the global filter. Now I'm going to create a new cat, which is going to be 3 posts. And then I'm going to delete the 7th cat. So the 7th cat is still the modified on is specified, even though I'm marking here as return. Let's see what's going on. So the entity is not deleted, it's added, which is great. Why does that happen 2 times? It's interesting. Let me check what's going on. On create, just creates a cat, save changes. Get ID, create, created. Here it is. When I try to delete the 8th cat, it's deleted. But it's going to hit immediate window and run change tracker. Dot entries. But it's hit twice. And I believe it's because, I guess, the save changes. Yeah. Let's search Framework Core, DB context, source code. save changes. So the first save changes calls the one with the boolean, so we don't need to override it. And this is okay. And the save changes async also calls the version with the boolean. So we don't need to override all of them. We need to just leave the version with the boolean like this. And now it should not fire twice. That was a tricky bug to catch. So let's go to the posts. Let's create another cat like this, send. It should happen only once. Yep, we fixed the problem. And now the ninth cat should have created on. Let's delete the ninth cat. This should also happen once. We can see that now only the deleted on property is set and not the modified on. So we fixed that. Good, but the problem is now if I go to get and get the cats, I see that everything is returned, including the deleted cats. Because we have a lot of cats here, but it should return only the mine cats, because in the cats controller we return only the cats from the current user, but the current user has deleted cats and still they show in the result. So let's create a normal cat one more time. Which we're not going to delete. And now we're going to add a global query. The global query will just say that every cat should has a global query, which query filter, sorry. Like this. This query filter actually tells Entity Framework that every time somebody tries to fetch a cat, the cat should not be deleted. So if we run the app now, and try to fetch all cats, it should return only the ones which are not deleted, which is essentially these two. This one and this one. Okay guys, I believe we added everything. So with this video we created quite a lot of stuff. It got a little bit longer, but I hope it was educational enough. And before we finish, I would like to show you my testing frameworks, which are on my GitHub profile. They are called mytest@asp.net, and if you are using ASP.NET Core and want to test your controllers, services, models, everything in between, make sure you take a look at this project because it allows you to assert and validate your application super fast. It cuts your testing time a lot. Okay guys, see you in the next video. Thank you, and make sure you leave a comment if you have any thoughts about this lesson. Bye.